Somewhere beneath the sand of the central Sahara, at a depth of less than 2 meters, there are bones. Not fossil bones, not the mineralized remains of prehistoric creatures laid down across geological time. These are the bones of people. Of children. Found curled beside the dried remnants of what were once freshwater lakes, buried in postures of deliberate interment, accompanied by the kind of careful arrangement that indicates ceremony, ritual, grief. The kind of burial that only happens when a community has time, and stability, and the emotional architecture that comes from living in one place long enough to believe you will still be there next season. The site is called Gabero, in the southern Sahara in present-day Niger. It was discovered in 2000 by a paleontologist named Paul Sereno, almost by accident, when his team's camels were diverted around a large dune and he found himself standing in what appeared to be a graveyard. A graveyard in the middle of one of the most inhospitable landscapes on Earth, thousands of years old, and yet arranged with a domesticity, a human ordinariness, that made the surrounding desert feel like the intrusion rather than the baseline. The burials at Gabero date to 2 distinct periods, approximately 10,000 years ago and again around 7,000 years ago. In both periods, the evidence suggests not a transient population moving through hostile terrain but a settled community living beside a lake that no longer exists, in a climate that no longer exists, in a Sahara that bore almost no resemblance to the one that covers their graves today. The Sahara was, within human memory, not a desert. And the question of what changed it, and whether that change happened entirely on its own, is one that the scientific record has not yet answered with the completeness that the evidence seems to demand. The scientific term for the period during which the Sahara supported a radically different climate than the one it has today is the African humid period, sometimes called the Green Sahara. It lasted, in broad outline, from roughly 11,000 years ago to approximately 5,000 years ago. A span of 6,000 years during which the Sahara received significantly more rainfall than it does now, supported extensive vegetation, hosted large permanent lakes and river systems, and was home to populations of people and animals that left traces across a landscape that is today almost entirely barren. The evidence for this period is extensive and comes from multiple independent sources. Pollen records from lake sediments show the presence of trees and grasses across regions that are now hyperarid. Rock art, found in extraordinary quantities across the central Sahara, in the Tasselite Enajur plateau of Algeria, in the Fezzan region of Libya, in the Tibesti Massif of Chad, depicts cattle, hippopotamuses, crocodiles, elephants, and human communities engaged in agriculture and herding, in places where none of these things could exist today. The bones of fish and aquatic fauna have been found hundreds of kilometers from any current water source. And the satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar surveys of recent decades have revealed, beneath the modern desert surface, the unmistakable channels of ancient river systems, the fossil drainage networks of a hydrological world that functioned, not so very long ago, with the complexity and productivity of the Nile. The conventional explanation for the end of the Green Sahara is an astronomical one, and it is well-founded. Earth's axial tilt and orbital parameters shift gradually over thousands of years in a set of cycles described by the Serbian mathematician Milutin Milankovic in the early 20th century. During the African humid period, the Milankovic cycles positioned the northern hemisphere's summer in a way that intensified seasonal heating over the African continent, drawing moist air inland from the Atlantic and producing the rainfall that sustained the Green Sahara. As the orbital parameters shifted back, the summer heating weakened, the monsoon retreated southward, and the Sahara dried. This explanation is not wrong. The orbital forcing is real, the mechanism is understood, and the broad trajectory of desiccation follows the astronomical prediction. But when you look at the rate and the timing of the transition, when you examine, in detail, what the paleoclimate record shows about how the Green Sahara ended, something about the purely astronomical explanation begins to feel slightly incomplete. Climate systems, even when driven by gradual orbital forcing, do not always change gradually. They can, under certain conditions, tip abruptly, crossing thresholds beyond which feedback mechanisms accelerate the change in ways that the initial forcing alone would not predict. The end of the African humid period appears to have been, at least in part, one of these abrupt transitions. A study published in the journal Geophysical Research Letters in 2006, examining lake sediment cores from across the Sahara, found evidence that in certain regions, the transition from humid to arid conditions occurred not over millennia but over centuries, and in some localities, possibly within timescales of decades. The trees and grasses that had stabilized the soil retreated. Without vegetation, the bare ground reflected more solar energy back into the atmosphere, further reducing rainfall. The soil, no longer held by roots, became available to the wind. The desert, once it crossed a certain threshold, began to make itself. This feedback mechanism, in which the loss of vegetation accelerates desiccation, which causes further vegetation loss, is a well-documented feature of dryland ecology. It is the kind of system that, once tipped, is very difficult to reverse without external intervention. The Sahara did not simply dry out because the orbital parameters changed. It also dried out because the conditions that had sustained it disappeared quickly enough that the ecosystem could not adapt. What caused those conditions to disappear quickly enough to trigger the feedback, rather than slowly enough to allow gradual adjustment, is a question that orbital forcing alone does not fully resolve. And this is where the human presence in the Green Sahara. The cattle herders, the lake communities, the people whose bones lie at Gabbero and whose cattle fill the rock art of the Tasselite, begins to enter the picture in a way that is not yet settled science but is, increasingly, a subject of serious research. In 2017, a group of climate researchers published a modeling study in the journal Earth System Dynamics that examined the role of human land use in the collapse of the Green Sahara. Using climate models that could simulate the interaction between vegetation cover, soil moisture, and atmospheric circulation, the researchers introduced the effects of overgrazing, the removal of vegetation by large herds of domesticated animals, into the Saharan landscape of the mid-Holocene. The results were striking. The models showed that intensive grazing in the Sahara during the period of drying could have substantially accelerated the transition from humid to arid conditions, pushing the system across tipping points that orbital forcing alone might have approached more slowly, or possibly not at all. The removal of ground cover by livestock exposed bare soil, reduced moisture retention, increased albedo, weakened the land surface's capacity to draw rainfall inland. The feedback loops that turned the Sahara into a desert may have been, in part, activated by the behavior of the people and animals living within it. This is not a conclusion the study presents as certain. It is a model, and models are simplifications. But it is a conclusion that the researchers present as physically plausible and consistent with the available evidence. And it sits within a broader conversation, ongoing in the paleoclimate literature, about the degree to which human land use during the Holocene contributed to landscape transformations that we have traditionally attributed entirely to natural forcing. The Green Sahara was home, during its final centuries, to what appear to have been substantial populations of pastoralists, cattle and goat herders moving across the landscape with their animals, as such communities have done in the Sahel and East Africa into the modern era. The rock art of this period is dominated by cattle. The cattle are depicted with an intimacy and a detail that suggests they were central to the culture that made the images, economically, spiritually, socially. Large herds of cattle, moving across a landscape already under mild climatic stress, consuming vegetation that would not quickly regrow in the face of reduced rainfall, are capable of initiating exactly the kind of soil exposure that the feedback models require. The people of the Green Sahara may not have intended to make a desert. But the possibility that they contributed, in ways they could not have understood or foreseen, to the collapse of the world that sustained them, is not easily set aside. The Sahara is the largest case, but it is not the only one. The Arabian Desert, the second largest hot desert on Earth, was also significantly greener during the African humid period. Paleohydrological surveys conducted in Saudi Arabia over the last decade have identified more than 10,000 ancient lakes across the peninsula, many of them dating to the same humid period that supported the Green Sahara. The Arabian Peninsula, now home to some of the most arid terrain on Earth, was, within the last 10,000 years, a mosaic of lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forests that supported extensive human and animal populations. The transition to aridity in Arabia appears to have followed a broadly similar pattern to the Saharan one, and the rock art found in the western Hijaz Mountains and in the Hale region of northern Saudi Arabia depicts, as in the Tassili, cattle herds, human communities, and a landscape of water and grass that has entirely vanished from the modern surface. The Gobi Desert, stretching across Mongolia and northern China, was similarly wetter during the early and middle Holocene. Paleoclimate records from the region show the advance and retreat of humid conditions over the last 12,000 years, with periods of vegetation and human habitation across areas that are now barren. The ancient pastoral communities of the Central Asian steppe, whose successors would eventually become the mounted nomads of recorded history, lived on the edges of these fluctuating arid zones, and the evidence of their movements tracks the expansion and contraction of the desert's margins across millennia. In each case, the transition to aridity is explicable in terms of orbital forcing, weakening monsoon systems, and the gradual reorganization of global atmospheric circulation that accompanied the end of the last glacial maximum. In each case, that explanation is substantially correct. And in each case, there remains a residue of the pattern, a rate of transition, a depth of aridity, a thoroughness of ecological collapse, that the astronomical explanation approaches but does not quite reach alone. The satellite surveys and ground-penetrating radar work that have been mapping the subsurface geology of the world's great deserts over the last 2 decades have produced an image of the landscape beneath the sand that is, in certain ways, more surprising than the landscape above it. Beneath the eastern Sahara, radar surveys have revealed not only the fossil river systems already mentioned but evidence of a network of ancient roads. Pathways worn into the bedrock by millennia of repeated passage, connecting sites that are now separated by hundreds of kilometers of empty desert. Some of these pathways align with known archaeological sites. Others lead to places where no systematic survey has yet been conducted, where the surface shows only sand and rock and the occasional scatter of lithic material that might be a campsite or might be nothing at all. In the Arabian Peninsula, LiDAR and satellite surveys have identified thousands of stone structures, mustadals, which are large rectangular enclosures built of stacked stone, spread across the landscape in densities that suggest a level of territorial organization and population that conventional estimates of ancient Arabian populations had not anticipated. The mustadals are not fully understood. They may be ritual enclosures. They may be related to cattle herding. Their alignment and distribution across the landscape is not random, and the scale of the construction effort they represent, thousands of structures, each requiring the movement of substantial quantities of stone, implies a degree of social coordination that the sparse archaeological record of the region had not previously suggested. In the Gobi, fossil river channels and the remnants of what appear to be ancient irrigation works have been identified in regions where no agriculture could currently survive. The irrigation features, if that is what they are, suggest that communities living on the margins of the expanding desert were attempting, for a time, to hold back the aridity through active landscape management, building the infrastructure of a wet world in a place that was becoming, irrevocably, dry. Whether that effort failed because the climate changed too quickly, or because the management itself accelerated the change, or because some other factor intervened, these are questions that the evidence as it currently exists does not resolve. The rock art of the Sahara is among the most extensive in the world. The Tassili Enajur Plateau alone contains more than 15,000 individual images, spanning a period from approximately 10,000 years ago to the historical era. A visual archive of 10 millennia of human presence in a landscape that underwent, during that time, one of the most complete environmental transformations in the Holocene record. What the rock art shows, read as a sequence, is the transition itself. The earliest images depict an aquatic world, people in boats, hippopotamuses, crocodiles, the large fauna of a well-watered landscape. Later images shift toward the pastoral. Cattle, and more cattle, vast herds presided over by human figures, with the water animals disappearing from the record. The latest prehistoric images show camels, the animal of the desert, the sign that the transformation is complete. The sequence is not precisely dated at every point. The images were made by many different communities across many different centuries, and the transitions between periods are gradual and overlapping. But the overall arc is unmistakable. The rock art is a record made by people who watched the world change, who depicted what was around them, and who, in their final images, were living in the early stages of the landscape their descendants would eventually find incomprehensible as anything other than desert. They did not know what they were watching. They could not have known. The timescale of the change was longer than any individual life, long enough that each generation inherited a landscape only slightly drier than the one their parents had described, in stories of lakes and hippos and grass as far as you could walk in a day. By the time the change was complete, the people who might have understood its full arc were gone. What remained was the rock, and the images, and the sand moving slowly across both. There is something quietly vertiginous about standing at the edge of the Sahara, or at the edge of any great desert, and knowing what the ground beneath your feet once supported. Not in the geological past, not in the era of dinosaurs or the age of inland seas, but recently, in human time, within the span of a civilization's memory if not its records. The people who buried their dead at Gobi were not ancient in any way that places them beyond imaginative reach. They were fully modern humans, cognitively indistinguishable from anyone alive today, living on the shore of a lake in a world that was green and wet and, in all likelihood, felt permanent to those who lived within it. Their world ended. The desert came. And the coming of the desert was not entirely, may not have been even mostly, something that happened to them. It may have been something they participated in, unknowingly, through the accumulated weight of choices made across generations in a landscape that could not absorb those choices indefinitely. What is uncomfortable about this possibility, the reason it tends to be handled carefully, stated with qualifications, left at the edge of the mainstream conversation rather than placed at its center, is not that it challenges our understanding of climate science. The science accommodates it. It is that it challenges something more foundational, the idea that civilizations are victims of the landscapes they inhabit, rather than co-authors of them. The deserts of the world are not simply places where civilization failed to take hold. Some of them may be places where civilization succeeded, flourished, expanded, multiplied its herds and its communities across a landscape of extraordinary abundance, and in succeeding, removed the conditions that made the success possible. That pattern, if it is a pattern, did not begin and end in the Sahara 10,000 years ago. It is a pattern that operates across timescales too long for any individual to perceive, in systems too complex for any community to fully model, with consequences that arrive generations after the decisions that set them in motion. The sand is still moving. It has been moving for 5,000 years, covering roads and lakes and graveyards and the stone images of cattle standing in grass that no longer grows. The question it leaves behind is not really about the past. It is about what we are covering now, with decisions whose consequences we cannot yet see, in a world that also feels, to those living within it, very much like it will last.